Big crowd, huh?
Looking. So far, 0.
I guess we're not a hot topic tonight.
Sounds like we peaked once again.
I think they heard somebody had coronavirus and they were afraid to tune in case they might catch it, you know?
Is that it?
A lot of sharp people in town.
Well, honestly, if that's all it takes, then hey,
We all need to sign up, huh?
yeah.
All right. Tonight's meeting is being convened in compliance with Governor Cuomo's executive orders, which suspend certain provisions of the open meetings law to allow municipal boards to convene meetings via video conferencing without in-person attendance by the public. The public has been provided with the ability to view here the proceedings of this special meeting, and a transcript of the meeting will be provided at a later date. The link to the live stream of the meeting has been provided to the public, and a video of the meeting will be made available on public access television, as well as a link on the town's website. Further, all submission materials and agendas are available to be viewed on the town's website. There is a quorum of the board for this special meeting of the planning board present for the meeting, so we'll call the meeting to order at 6:37 or so. So this is a special meeting to discuss now the form-based code proposal that's before the town board. The planning board is one of several interested agencies, and this is our first crack at taking a look at the form-based code of and by itself. We have looked at, we've tried to segment this into 2 separate discussions. We have looked at the draft GEIS. We've issued a note to the town board with some thoughts and comments and questions regarding the draft GEIS. And now this is a session which might be additional sessions, but this is our first session to really just look at the form-based code separate apart from the draft GEIS. So I think it would be good. Sabrina provided us with, I think, a very, very useful outline of topics, 9 separate topics to consider in connection with the form-based code. We had asked her a month or so ago to take a look at it and help us try to herd our cat-like conversation at times and to kind of streamline it into these areas. So the first one.
Hey, Bob.
Yes. Yeah. I'm sorry. Yeah.
So before we dive into the topics themselves, I just want to make a point about like the sort of kind of to couch the discussion. If that's okay.
Sure. Absolutely.
So I'm not on Facebook, but I get shown things, and when our letter about the DGEIS was made public, our comment letter, as expected, it was read and I think well received by many in the public, and I'm very proud of the letter that we put together and the comments, and I think that we made a lot of great points about the DGEIS and the critique of the draft environmental document. I think is very helpful, and I just think that oftentimes nuance gets lost, and also this can be really technical stuff. And 2 points. One, the critique of the DGEIS I think was good and well warranted, and all in service of creating a better environmental document. The point of the document is to assess all scenarios and understand environmental impacts so that a good choice can be made, and also create sufficient kind of backup and justification for any choice that the town board does make that is within scope, obviously. So I think the work that we did in making comments to the draft document will indeed get us to a point of where we have a better final document. I think that's what the purpose of a lot of the comments were, beyond just ours as the planning board. And I know we had discussion initially about whether we should separate discussion about the EIS and the form-based code, and I was and remain a proponent of separating those two, because in my eyes anyway, at least, It is a very different type of discussion. And the purpose of well, I guess I'm opening the question, but from my perspective, we did what we did about the DGEIS, and I think we did it well, and I appreciate all the help of Sabrina and the staff, and of course, Tom and Bob for doing, the bulk of the writing. But I think we put out a good document, which raised a ton of great questions, and now it's sort of in the hands of the consultants to produce a great final document. And then on the form-based code now, the purpose of this discussion, I think, one is to raise any questions or issues we have with the code itself, but more to sort of talk, not more, but also to think about sort of the input from the planning board about the specifics about process, but also about the concepts that are being put forward here and how they may be implemented. And the reason I brought up the Facebook piece, again, I'm not on Facebook, but I feel like because nuance is hard and the technical stuff is hard to grasp sometimes, I worry that some of our critique of the draft environmental document may have been misconstrued. Of course, we can't control how other people interpret what we say, but I just want to be clear that a critique of the environmental document is intended to strengthen the environmental document. Is not necessarily, in fact, explicitly was not a statement on the proposed form-based code in any way, which is why I wanted to separate those two. And tonight we're beginning our sort of official discussion and comments about the code, concepts behind the code, how to be implemented, and what impact that'll have on our town. I don't know if that was helpful or a waste of time, but it's just something I wanted to get out there before we dove into the topics themselves.
Eldad, I think that's excellent. I agree with you, and I thank you for teeing this up. And that we don't need to spend like an hour and a half on this subject, but I think it's really, really important to draw the distinction between the first product, which was that memo, which was directed towards it. Really, the way I saw it, and I think that the way it was intended was really not so much a memo directed at the town board, as much as it was a memo directed at the town board's consultant.
100%.
To correct a document that I think we all agree had many flaws in it. And I know just from talking to some people that we're not alone in thinking that. And so I agree that the public should understand that the DGIS is a document that, yes, the town board put it out, but it was a technical document, not a policy document, but a technical document that tried to elucidate what the pros and cons and the impacts and benefits of the draft form-based code. And I have heard some pushback on that subject. That not some pushback, but I've heard some echo that on, I guess in particular Facebook, some people had taken out of context and out of intent some comments that were made and are using it as a flag to attack the form-based code itself. And that's really unfortunate. And I think you're right. We can't control what people think, but we certainly can maybe try a little harder to be careful about the tone that we take in the document we produce. And so I think it's excellent. Thank you for teeing this up. On the subject of the form-based code, I think it's a different matter entirely. And that's why I'm glad that we separate the two, because the form-based code, I think, actually is a town board document. And it's a draft document, appropriately so. But it essentially lays out what the town board believes is the proper policy for development in the hamlet. And to my way of thinking, it's obviously a very important document. But I think that we need to understand, doesn't mean that we shouldn't comment on areas that we think are important to comment on. But I think that it does mean that we need to be careful about our tone, and we need to be careful about the sorts of things that we think are really important, right? As opposed to the minor things that get worked out, somewhere down the line, and let the town board work those out. I hesitate to come up with a chapter and verse, 15-page memo on this subject, because I don't think that it's really probably warranted. And again, it's a draft, and I think that the town board, in the process of the next couple of months, is going to work some of these things through. So I would like to be sure that, in my opinion, we ought to be hitting the big topics that we think are really substantive, do it in a respectful way, and not belabor points, but do it in a way which gets the main points out, and then move on from there. That's my feeling.
I think that's those are good statements, and I think it's appropriate. I received some calls and comments on our document, and in each case, I corrected the folks on the other side, on the wire. I think we took great effort to make certain that our comments on the DGIS were non-policy, and that they were dealing with the technical issues, the environmental issues as required under SECR, and as we saw it with our experience. So I thought we were very careful about it. It was not a policy statement whatsoever, in my opinion. It was really intended, and I think the function was limited to providing the consultants guidance for the next round of providing information to the town board. We as a board have always taken the position that more information is better than less, and the more we can get in a substantive manner, intelligent manner, it's more helpful. So I think that's very much what we did. I suspect, I believe that the form-based code that we're going to tackle now, this is a different situation. It's less technical. There are lots of technical issues, which are probably the architectural, leaving to the architects, but it's really, this is the policy document. So this is the one where policy gets discussed. And of course, apparently there's a great, I'm also not on Facebook, thank goodness. And so we can get to ignore all this fun. But it's, I think we've always had good, intelligent conversations, and I think the town board will appreciate our substantive comments. I don't expect necessarily that we have congruence, because this will be a policy discussion, and this is a policy document, nor do I expect all 5 town board members to be in congruence on this. So it's going to be a policy discussion. I think we should just frame those issues out there and try to help the town board and the town itself and its discussion as it works its way through this document to get to a good one.
I'm confused. You said this is going to be a policy discussion, but we didn't have policy discussions in the GEIS, right?
No,
I don't think we've really hit upon much.
We got rid of them. We got rid of them in the DGIS.
Right, and I think this is the form-based code necessarily is one that involves much more policy.
Well, so, I think it has a fair amount of policy, but I think it has a lot of process in it also, which is
well, yes, of course. Mm-hmm.
That's true too. That's right.
Yep.
Just to sorry, but put a pin on it, but just one example. We made some comments about the DGIS, the consultant of the DGIS stating that more people living in the hamlet was going to be good for the businesses in the hamlet. And that may be true. It may improve the walkability, but I think it was not inappropriate to ask the consultant to demonstrate how that is true. And people may have been misconstrued that for us saying, it's not true, right? And so that's the problem that I think that's a problem we got into. And I really think that the town board, I think, understands, and I want the public to understand, that the DGIS review that we did was in support of the town board initiative to give them an EIS document that was supportable, right? First of all, and an EIS document which would give them a broad range of information so that they could make the final decision on the final FBC, form-based code. And that was the intent and the purpose of our work. So I can understand how it get misconstrued, but I don't know how much you can do about that other than to be sure that we're careful, with our language.
Yep.
Okay. Well, the first topic that was framed here by Sabrina, we're just talking about the goals of the comprehensive plan and the goals of the FBC. I don't know, we sort of talked about this in the draft, and I'll just lead with this and throw this out for thought. It seems to me that more should be done here in this section that uses the comprehensive plan as the touchstone for the code. There's a very, it seems to be a very glancing, referral. And then, I mean, later on, one of the challenges I have with this form-based code is to go back and say, okay, now that we do this, and if we build out everything under whatever it was, alternative 3, I think it was, 3. If we do all that, what have we accomplished in terms of the articulated goals in the comprehensive plan? How many have we touched upon? How many have we satisfied? How many have we not touched upon? How well have we done it? So I think, again, we've echoed this, I think, in the draft GEIS, but remember, I believe that the comprehensive plan is the touchstone for this whole process. And again, it was the public input at that gave us the comp plan that really is something that we should use as the basis and almost as the method to qualify our success in what we're articulating in the form-based code. So I'll throw that out as Sabrina's number 1 about the goals of the comp plan, and whether you folks think it's fine the way it is, or if you think that there should be a little bit more brought in terms of those targets. I will tell you my read going through this again. The 2 things that really jumped out of the comprehensive plan was the constant referral to the community's housing needs. Not quite sure what community is, and again, I mentioned that in the draft GEIS. And then, of course, the other, which I think is equally important, we heard equally frequently, is the fostering of a thriving commercial and civic space. So, with that context, I think that's what the form-based code should be leaning on and launching forward with.
So I had just a quick, and some of the comments that I had made, which Tom, you correctly pointed out that probably some of that doesn't go in the DGEIS. Some of that is still very confusing to me as to how much of that goes into the DGIS versus the form-based code, just because I feel like, I would just like to hear where you're drawing these lines, because it's important to know, it's important for the DGIS document to actually reflect that what is being covered by the form-based code is actually being, and to study what the impacts are, right? And so that was where I was going from, and I think we are saying that that's part of this document, right? Saying that the comp plan's goals were X, and here's our final scenario of how to get there, and what is, if we actually meet it and build it the way we've stated, how many of the comp plan goals are sort of met. My question is, are we trying to sort of bring some of these thoughts from the comp plan, and then where can we ask for the translation from the comp plan to what that ultimate plan should be? And sorry if it's not very clear.
No. If I just can interrupt for a second, because I think that I need to set a context for you guys to have your discussion. The code itself would be adhered to the existing town code. It is a section within the code. Right now, there's the general of, the introduction of a section of the code which goes through authority, intent and purpose, general ideas, additions to the district. It goes through general legislative language that's found within every section of the code. Okay. And so you guys had this discussion over the comp plan goals. The question is based on, and I don't know if you can answer this, and you may want to table your goal discussion after you start talking about the content of the legislation. And I think things like public process, public review, those topics and how you envision them shaping out, they will get translated into legislative language. Okay. And I think when you last discussed this, Eldad asked a question for everybody to think about. And that is, what do you envision your role to be? And I don't want to speak for you, Eldad. I'm sure you can say it much better, but I think you should identify the procedural processes or even the content specific regulations. And Tom kind of did his first draft of what he was looking at. That's the nuts and bolts. I don't think we should talk about how do you meet the comp plan goals, because for all intensive purposes, the professional consultant who drew up this code understood what the comp plan said and the goals in there. If you don't think a regulation is reflecting a goal, we should definitely talk about it, but you really should focus on the mechanics within the code itself. I don't know if that helps, or if you go.
I'm not sure I agree with all of that, Sabrina. And I know the specific point that I think Hanan is referencing here. And to sort of give an example, I can't give an example. Let me see if I can address it in a different way. The form-based code is supposed to be the execution of policy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the policy, the broad policy, is in the comprehensive plan, and the comprehensive plan language is so broad, right? That the definitions that we're all struggling for. Well, what does it actually mean? All those broad, nebulous terms.
Right.
If there is something that at the policy level we think is at the policy level that is not being addressed in town, right? Forget the codes for a moment, but isn't being addressed in town policy, right? And as a consequence is not being executed in the form-based code, then that may be a discussion for this group now, because we see a hole in the form-based code. But I think it really goes to town board policy on a particular subject. It's not as though that particular item is not addressed already in the code, because it's already in our code. Mm-hmm. We may not feel that it's adequate to address what we think the problem is, right? But in fact, the form-based code, I think specifically, unless I'm mistaken, Sabrina, refers back to the other sections of the town code on that particular subject. So I don't mean to suggest that the issue that you're concerned about doesn't warrant, full inspection. I'm just not sure, and maybe Nick can weigh in here. I'm just not sure that since it doesn't appear in the form-based code, I'm not sure that it's something that should be part of this discussion, because we'd be stepping on a broad town board policy that they feel that they've already addressed. And I'm just not sure this is the right venue for it. I frankly don't know, but I'm raising the question.
Well, I don't think I articulated, maybe I beat around the bush too much. But for example, we might as well get into process, right? So right in the very, section B4, this article is further intended to implement a streamlined process of development, application, review, and approval based upon compliance with a form-based code in order to expedite development that fulfills the purposes of this article. Now, I don't think there's any reference in the comprehensive plan or about a desire for an expedited review process, nor did we ever hear anything from the public about an expedited review process. This has been called, I believe, you know, and Tom, you were there in that committee meeting. The two of us objected to this kind of express process. We thought it was inappropriate. We thought it was inconsistent with what our experience has been many years on the planning board and dealing with the public and having public discussions. So I'm saying there's an example where I think that this has popped out that's outside and separate and apart from the comprehensive plan. The consultants have put this in. When we questioned the consultants before they put this together, we said, is it necessary to link a form-based code with this kind of process? And the answer was clearly given, no. You could keep your process identical. You could come up with some sort of blended process. But this process that is being proposed is very expedited. So,
Bob, just sort of to jump in a little bit, the discussion about the process wouldn't be in the comprehensive plan, right? The comprehensive plan talks about zoning and the use of land and things of that nature. So I wouldn't expect it to be in the comprehensive plan. It is a policy discussion that I'm not going to speak for the town board, but it would have come from the town board. So nor does it really belong. So I don't know that that's before you, other than talking about how it's proposed in the form-based code in front of you.
Well, ultimately, that's the discussion is, how it's proposed. But my suggestion is it's sort of popped in here without certainly any sort of public support, without any sort of support from the comp plan. You may correctly argue that it's really inappropriate for it to be in there, and that may absolutely be the case. But again, it's one of those things to me that stands out, that's separate and apart from what we've done in the past. And the reasons for doing it are, in my opinion, questionable. And we'll get into that later in terms of specific points. But when I talk about the comp plan as being the touchstone, clearly this is not a touchstone. It was not mentioned in the comp plan. It probably should not because it's too much in the weeds. But here, I mean, we might as well talk about process. The process is being proposed in the form-based code.
I agree. The process is part of a form-based code, so you should talk about it, especially because it impacts what you've done in the past, what you may do in the future, and how you're going to process things. So I think it's appropriate for you to comment on it. I'm just thinking it's not appropriate to question how it got here. The town board has its own prerogative and rights to put what they want in legislation.
Yep,
I don't think Bob was questioning necessarily how it got here. We should just go ahead and talk about that if that's the topic of the moment.
I think we should. Why not?
Well, here if I just a little bit of perspective. Form-based, these codes are Euclidean codes and form-based codes, and the form-based code, I'm assuming that what we have here, because we hired consultants who know how to do these things, we have probably the state-of-the-art form-based code in pretty much chapter and verse, all the things it's supposed to address and the ways in which it addresses it. I'd like to suggest that as a sort of a paradigm or a model you pick off the shelf doesn't necessarily apply to every community. And it could be that their form-based codes in chapter and verse as it's presented here would apply very well to a place like White Plains or a place like Topeka, Kansas, or in the many communities. But we have a small hamlet here we're dealing with. And I think that it was not properly tailored in this particular respect, the public review in this particular respect for the purposes of our hamlet. Many communities and downtowns can be distressed, and they can be distressed for a number of reasons, economically distressed. And one of the benefits of the form-based code that was presented to us as a benefit of the form-based code was that it expedites the review process. Expediting the review process is a strategy that is frequently used in distressed communities just to promote development because they really need development. They really need to move things forward and attract developers. That was actually one of the arguments that was made for an expedited review process for our hamlet. I think that the town board needs to decide whether they believe that we are so distressed economically distressed, that we need to take the guardrails off and let these things go through one channel. And the one channel, which is demonstrated, which is listed over and over and over again, is the development department. It's sort of one-stop shopping. And I think I know where you're going with this, Bob, is that to me, I think that for our small community, I don't think that's necessary. I think that the real estate future of this town is definitely solid, and that we don't need that kind of drastic measure, and that a public review process such as we've been able to run in town for as long as I can remember is perfectly appropriate to a small community where people are going to be impacted in neighborhoods which are adjacent to this area. And I don't think that it in any way, I don't think that it inhibits good development. I think it promotes good development. And I was alarmed when I made the list when I went through it. I just got alarmed, so I made a list of all the areas where it looked like the development department had been given authority, and in so many different areas, and that have been taken away from the Architectural Review Board, the Environmental Review Board, the Planning Board, and I just got to be very concerned about that.
Yeah, I agree with that concern. For sure. I think that if the development department is really the one that's going to end up doing this, they're going to have to hire staff. I mean, they don't have an architect on board that's seasoned and experienced and knowledgeable about all these things. And I think taking things away from the ARB relative to streetscape and signage and a whole bunch of other things that maybe sometimes we feel, well, that's not too significant. It is significant when you're going to change the whole tenor and atmosphere in the downtown and the look of it. It's like, at the corner of my example in my mind is, while there's some nice scapes that are laid out, there's a 5-story building that they want to put that is being suggested for consideration at the corner of King and Greeley. And that building is so large that I don't have a sense of how it fits into the community. For instance, and I'm not on the ARB or the other things. So I think
I think overall the form-based code is an appropriate strategy, and I support it because, for example, I think what you're really doing is you're changing from Euclidean use and measurements to more of form and appearance. But most importantly, we've run into this a number of times. Our zoning code is anachronistic to a large degree. Look how many times we've had to have the building department, the town building inspector go through hoops and try to interpret the usage and whether or not the new computer store is really a silversmith and is okay as a permitted use. So this form-based code where you have more flexibility, including flexibility for the future, I think is terrific. I think it's the way to go. I think lending more and more flexibility to this very dynamic, evolving marketplace is the way to go. I think it's inappropriate for the town to be sitting here and saying, well, you got 1,100 square feet it's always been a delicatessen. So, now you want to make it, I don't know what, but, now we have to go through a process. I support that. There's some bumps and things in here, though, that I think there were two unfortunate linkages with this this proposed code, and I think they were unnecessary. And one was, of course, this very, very, I call it radical expedited process, and the another subject was the unfortunate, in my mind, linkage with rezoning the public property. Both are unnecessary in looking at a form-based code and unnecessarily muck up things in terms of complications and getting people all worked up and angry. I think an expedited process makes great sense, but I think, as we talked about before, with some guardrails and guide rails, just to give you an idea of some of my thoughts, and of course we can talk about it, but it seems to me that there should be some sort of public process, not one where, you get notice and you have to go down to the building part and find out what's going on. And I think there was something here where just before you get the CO, there's another element where the public gets to look. Well, at that point, you've got a building up and you're just before a CO. That's crazy.
It's too late.
But if you're going to propose any sort of new development in a transect department area, I think that should be subject to our current court sort of review, whether it's the zoning board, the planning board, ERB, town board, whatever it might be. And the other I'll throw out there is anything that is going to enlarge the current developed footprint or the current height of a building in the hamlet needs to go through a review process. The thing that I thought was the big streamlining issue for the form-based code and this generic EIS was we were saving the developers all the time and the ridiculous costs of doing their own separate EIS every time they had a proposal. We would do this generically. We would all know what the traffic impacts were. We know what the parking impacts were. Then a developer would not have to go in and be stymied and delayed and have those costs. That was going to be, I thought, the part of the process that was really going to expedite things for a developer. I think in my view, to eliminate the all-important public input on any given project in a town of this size, where the transect areas are so close to the the hamlet areas, I just think it's asking for trouble, and I think it's inconsistent with the culture of this town, the history of this town, and the history, the way we have always done things. It's a very engaged audience, a very engaged public, and in my view, we go through this public process not just to go through a process and that's just have a meeting, but the public process, I think, is very often, if not most often, ended up with a better product, a better development, with that give and take in the input. And I think, if nothing else, just the optics of having a presentation to the public so they know what the project is important. Rather than, as we hear, the people are referring tonight about what they hear on Facebook. Oh my goodness. If we don't have that kind of an open dialogue and presentation publicly, you get all kinds of rumors coming out. Oh, did you hear they're putting a 5-story thing here that's going to, lean over your property? You'll never see sun, after September and this kind of thing. So those are my thoughts in terms of the optics, the importance of process, and where I thought the expedited process was going to lead us and where it was going to really going to end in terms of having the generic EIS available to any developer, because we had done a good job with that. We knew where we were, and not the expedited review process where essentially this is the last public hearing. Once we finish with this form-based code, this is it. There are no more public hearings on development in downtown Hamlet. It's done. It just goes administratively and it's done. I don't think that that sits well with the town. End of
I
speech.
agree with it completely.
Well, I think that there are some exceptions to that. Oh, go ahead. You started speaking.
No, I was saying, having been in the development side of things, I do understand that there is the need for a certain amount of speed for us to sort of attract the right kind of developers and the right kind of people to help build in our community if that's the direction we're going. But at the same time, I absolutely violently agree with you that you cannot take off the guardrails, and you cannot just have this one review and then it just is taken over by a very administrative process. I think what's more important is, like you said, we need to point out that we already are achieving some of the steps that we had gone out to take, that development's not going to take 10 years to come up and build out something, which seems to be the worry right now, right? But look, we are already saving the development community a lot of time. We are serious about building, and we as a town agree about what's being built. That said, having a review process, whatever it is, even if it's slightly pared down, it should be there. There is no doubt in my mind about that.
I agree with that. We need some sort of process. And, I pitched for the ARB earlier. I think they're an important piece of this. Even when, the project starts and there's a time where the applicant has to deliver to all abutting properties certain documents, an elevation, a plat kind of thing, which is interesting, but it only gives you part of the story. But then after that, everything has to go through the development department, which I think if that's the way it's going to end up being, then the development department has to hire the right staff, whether it be consultants or permanent staff, and has to have meetings that are open to the public, in the town hall or by this method here with Zoom, because that's what's going to be missing is that when one abutter says, I have a problem, and he goes in and talks individually, well, that isn't attracting other people that have similar problems. And that sort of lessens the ability to come to a better answer as to what should be done. And what occurs now allows that to happen more often than not.
So,
And also sort of, sorry, go on, get Eldad.
thank you, Conan. So a couple points. One is it's not just about speed for the developers in the private sector, for the applicants. From my perspective, the bigger concern is not speed, but it's about certainty.
Mm-hmm.
And this process as proposed certainly provides certainty. The other piece of this is that I wouldn't say that guardrails are being taken off so much as they're being more front loaded and then shifted, because it's not like you can just build whatever you want. You have to build per the code. But let's talk specifics. I mean, I think I've made it clear that I'm probably a little bit more comfortable than the rest of you all with allowing a more by right style approval process in the downtown, and I understand not being okay with that. But let's get specific, right? We have a process today, and then the question is that there are three options, three basic options for this specific part of our town that's being considered right now, which is keep the process exactly the same, make it more, I guess, more highly regulated, or make it, less regulated, right? Those are the three options. This, as proposed, makes it significantly less, I guess, regulated, but that's not to say that there are no regulations, but it's a faster process with more certainty, and it is, it's not discretionary for the most part. And the discretion part, I think, is what worries a lot of people. But what we talked about, I don't know when, but a month or two ago, is this idea of, first of all, understanding what it is that drives people, that requires people to come to the planning board. And are we asking to change that with this code? And if we are, is that okay? And to what extent can we hold public hearings to raise issues, but not have, have an advisory role as opposed to a more a role with some teeth? So I guess my question, in addition to those statements, Sabrina, is as the code is proposed right now, is the planning board completely taken out of any role for any development, a lot merger, a subdivision? Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Can I?
Within that hamlet, within that.
Yeah.
Correct.
So
Okay.
so let
Within the
me
study area.
let me just go through. I understand that the intent. I think the intent of the form-based code in having a streamlined process and would look to be very sort of rigid, hard lines, right? Physical lines, at least, to take the unknown out of the process, which developers love, and I can understand why, and make it easier for the town to go ahead and move things along. Here are the discretionary, Eldad, you talked about, remove some of the discretionary items from the process so that there's more certainty. Here are the discretionary items that the development department has from my reading of the form-based code. I'm gonna go through them very quick. Steep slope protection. That actually is one of ours. The development department may combine review submissions. In other words, combine concept with schematic or schematic with design development. They may move a wetland steep slope review to other stages in the process. They can, determination of variances can be done by the development department. Land subdivision done by the development department. Reduction of nonconformity allows uses not permitted by code. Minor deviations, street alignments, open space configurations, build to line adjustments up to 15%, frontage occupancy up to 50% discretionary with the development part within the code. New streets, discretionary, additional open space, cul-de-sac approval, parking requirement reductions, parking garages on the build to line, loading requirements, waiver of buffer and fencing requirements, sign requirement waivers. All of those are discretionary. And they're discretionary, according to my reading of the code, they're discretionary upon review within the building department, but doesn't get the public review that I think, Bob, I think you're mostly concerned about, and I'm concerned about. And I think that the first function of putting it within putting this process in front of a board, forget who it is for the moment, putting it in front of a board, gives it the public daylight in a process that allows them to come and comment on not only what they see in the code, but the discretion that may be being applied to the application, which, once it's done and it gets built, they say, well, how did that happen? I didn't see that in the code. Well, it's because it was done by, within a town office somewhere and allowed the developer to do it. So I agree, but look, there is justifiable, I think, frustration with the process that we have now. But because it takes time, and oftentimes we really can't agree among ourselves, which has got to drive these people crazy. I think that we could be a little bit harder on ourselves in coming to terms about what we agree on before we send them out the door with, well, this guy thinks that, and that person thinks that, and I don't know what I'm supposed to do now. So this might be, but at the same time, I think we also get painted by the brush of actually us being non-responsive, when in fact, many of these applicants are non-responsive. They come back with incomplete materials. I mean, there's a long history of this in one project in particular we're all familiar with. So there's a certain amount of unfairness that's applied to us in that way. But I also think, Eldad, that, and I think this is to Kanan's point also, that if we're going to craft a role for the planning board here, if the town board chooses to do that, we could really come up with a process which is maybe more fair, which is quicker, which addresses these things in a reasonable way that doesn't impede development, right? But allows the public to participate and gets them out the door quicker than than they do now in many cases. So I think that might be an opportunity for us to correct some of our, I don't want to say correct our behavior, but improve our own internal process.
Well, I think inherently that will happen with the form-based code to the extent that occupancy is one issue we're not going to be concerned with as much, if at all, and use. And then, of course, the other is the environmental impacts. I mean, whenever we have something in the hamlet, it's usually, I can't think of anything in the hamlets that has taken more than a meeting or two in the last several years anyway, but in theory, it would be because there's some sort of infrastructure issue, pipes or sewers and this kind of stuff, and people haven't done their homework and don't realize that they're crossing other people's property and have to figure all that out and then make adjustments for those property owners. And then, of course, the design itself will be taken care of in terms of the architectural features. So, and of course, I think the elimination of this EIS, this is the stumbling block to any developer who was confronted with New York having to deal with secret and getting through the EIS process. It's just an enormous benefit.
Yeah,
And maybe
it's often a year-long process.
and maybe there are other, from that long
Mhm.
list that you read out, Tom, there are other things that we can think about as a group that we are willing to sort of say, this is something that we don't need to worry about every time a review process comes along. And, I just feel like making sort of a carte blanche, I know there's a framework, Eldad, and that, we are giving developers a certain amount of certainty. I get that. I also understand the frustration behind all of this, but not have, giving so much of this away to a very small group of people, a staff that may not have the capacity to do it, have external community reviews. And I think here, the boards are invested because they're also community members. And I feel like that is definitely, these are people who understand how planning and development is done. At the same time, there is some review process and an understanding of what we want to live with. Yes, that in itself can be very different. My visualization of what our town wants to be 20 years from now may be very different from the rest of you. But, I think, yes, that is definitely an issue. But maybe there's a list of, from those lists, we can carve out time that it needs to get out of planning and get into architectural review or whatever. Like we can give it time limits. We can constrain what we do control and what we don't, and try to find a middle ground. I just think that every circumstance 10 years from now, 5 years from now may look very different. And having our community have a say at that time in some shape or form is important, is just my viewpoint.
I subscribe to that.
Kanan, I love the idea of taking this as an opportunity to form a better process, even though it would just be in one part of our town.
Right.
That sounds good to me, and we should do that. I'm not moved by the concern that this would be too burdensome on staff for the building department, because if that's the case, then we should impose fees on applicants and to raise funds to hire more staff, right? I mean, that's not a reason not to do something. And I mean, at the risk of I don't know, maybe being wrong, but I would imagine that the town staff does so much. I mean, I don't know how much what we do alleviates their work. Exactly. I mean, our meetings don't necessarily take work off of their plate, and so to suggest that us hosting meetings would make their life easier is.
It's a Thursday night, by the way.
Yeah. But to the point of, I mean, I don't know that we can come up with it tonight. So maybe let's talk. How do we do that? Maybe it's like a series of ideas that we can, send back and forth to each other. But maybe coming up with a recommendation for a process for the hamlet is the way to go about this.
If I could just interrupt a second, because a very healthy discussion. It is clear, and it has been clear from public comments, that the process that is currently in draft not meeting the mark, right? There's specific areas, Bob, you raised two, you raised the town land, and then I believe the public's involvement in this process raised by Dick. Taking that as a touch point, how would you create a process what your process is today, right? And, for example, 91 Bedford was a change of use. It was a 3-year process. It did not require an extensive environmental review. But what would you recommend to try and streamline the process? And Dick, you said a year. These are all very helpful, and being the folks who deal with this the most. out of the town boards, aside from the actual building permit process, where I can definitely say 90% of the time, if not 100% of the time, it is due to the applicant's inability to provide what the building department needs to issue the permit. As the board who does this, how would you recommend the process be changed? Okay, keeping in mind what you are having issue putting your arms around to streamline it or to make it more efficient.
Here's one thought that may or may not be helpful. There are somebody brought up the I think it was you, Eldad, but brought up the Architectural Review Board. I think I also brought it up. And the Architectural Review Board, as I understand it, looks at just about everything that gets built. I'm not suggesting that their role ought to be circumscribed, although the detail in this form-based code, when it comes down to facade treatments, you just wonder if they'll have a role or not. But to the extent that they do have a role, I can see, rather than them going to the Architectural Review Board 1 month and going to the Planning Board, the next month, and then going back to the Architectural Review Board and having to submit documents. And that's part of the problem, right? Like 2 weeks ahead of time. That maybe for projects within the hamlet, there are joint meetings of a board, and the applicant comes and presents the whole project to the boards that are appropriate to review it. And it could be, I don't know who it would be, we have to figure out who that would be depending on the project, I guess, but the ERB and the Architectural Review Board, or the ERB and Planning Board, but make it sort of one stop, right, when they come, rather than have these separate meetings that they have to go to, which just sort of drags out the calendar and I'm sure drives them nuts. That would be one way to do it. And that would be a way to get the public involved in all of the issues that are being discussed on projects within the hamlet, not only just where the lot lines are and where the curb cuts are, but what the architecture is going to look like. And that might be one way to sort of combine processes and get it into one. The duration of the process after that, I just don't know how to address, Sabrina. I mean, there are 3 steps in the process, the way it's drawn up in the form-based code. There's concept review, there is schematic review, and design development review, which are the classic steps in any design problem. And so does the approval board or review board, it's called a review board right now, not an approval board. That's a separate subject. The review board, do they participate in all of those? Do they participate only in the second one, or the second and third, or the first and second? Because the more times that the review board gets involved, it extends the process, because then the applicant needs to prepare drawings, submit them to the building department 2-3 weeks ahead of time. And if they aren't on schedule, they miss it a week, then they're sort of kicked out for another month. I can't speak to that part of the process, because that is document management and review management by the development department, not the planning board. So I guess my only suggestion is that if we can combine reviews into one review body, right, that might help. I don't know what to do with the rest of it.
If I may just kind of do a reality check here, so you all are familiar and working from the same page. Right now, the ARB is invoked by your board if and when you have a project that is large enough that requires an EIS. Okay, because then they become an interested agency and you refer the documents to them. There's also referrals on certain properties right now, which you guys refer to ARB, depending on what the application is. It falls outside of the form-based code right now. That doesn't take away any authority regarding those things. But the ARB, a $5,000 limit, and they specifically look at the architecturals, the design of the outside of the building, windows, the color, that type of thing. And I don't even think they go into a lot of detail on color, because the code is very specific as to their authority. They currently have authority that your board does not have. You guys don't talk about color of buildings. talk about type of trim. The ARB review usually takes one meeting on a project. So when a building permit comes in, if it is at the extent of, if it's the dollar amount of improvements that the ARB sees, 90% of them are one meeting. The larger projects like Sunshine Children's Home, maybe that was 3 meetings. Because usually the applicant has their architect attend the ARB meeting and they go through everything in one meeting.
So let me just cut to the chase here. Are you suggesting that the ARB, are you suggesting that perhaps the ARB would not be a board that would be useful to combine in?
No, I'm not suggesting that at all. I
Okay,
just
so
wanted
what's
you to understand that the process for ARB review is not a multi-month or year process.
Okay, very good.
But I do recall on 91 Bedford, because that's a specific. Remember at the very end, they had to come back to us, and I think they had to come back to ARB also. I never did understand why they had to come back to us. But remember, there was something with the manufacturer and the color of the trim of the windows, and they had to come back to us, and we said, I don't know, it was sort of a green color, it's fine. And what does ARB say?
In your approval, you specified certainty on the color and the manufacturer of what they could no longer get. And so rather than take responsibility for them not being in compliant with your resolution, that we thought it best to err and go back to you. But that was clearly during your discussion, something that was more appropriate for the ARB to be discussing. But since you discussed it and you resolved it, we had to bring them back to you.
No, but so I think Bob's, unless I'm mistaken, Bob's point, I think, was they had to go to the ARB twice. Was that it? And
Yeah,
that particular
and to us.
Yeah.
They had to come back to both of your boards. Typically, it would have just gone back to the ARB because it was the change in the architecture.
Okay, got it. So that's something that is appropriate or we can fix. But it seems to me that any meeting, I'm just trying to make the point that any meetings at any of the 3 steps in the process, figure out which they are. If there is a public meeting before a board, a review board, that all the boards or all the people, all the town who are responsible to comment and to review be at that meeting, make their comments, and give and expedite the process that way. That's all I'm suggesting. If the ARB is not appropriate, that's fine. But
and I'm not commenting on which board should or should not be there.
Right.
Just throwing information.
Right.
But I think if there's some sort of sense that another board would be helpful to the process, it should not be segmented into separate meetings. I mean, for example, we've done this with ERB. We've met together in the field as well as meetings with ERB. For good heavens, we've done co-lead agencies with other towns on projects. So it can be done. So it could be low-hanging fruit and it could expedite. So I think it's something that we should really consider with LDAD's proposal to really sit down and see if we can't come up with some elements of a process that, along with the EIS, along with the form-based code, could really expedite the things that are really not that important to the process.
I'd just like to ask, is the zoning code, the zoning board, I don't see them having a role here at all. Am I right?
The zoning board would have a role into a project that refuses to comply with the form-based code.
So they could apply to the zoning board for that.
Correct.
Correct, they could get variances.
Very good. Okay.
So it's the same rule they
But
have.
yeah, but I thought variances would be under the building inspector.
Only specific variances. The building inspector does not issue variances. Under the form-based code, there's a proposal to allow certain variances of certain amounts, and it's defined with form-based code to give the building inspector the authority, development, as part of the development department, to issue a variance. And Tom read through some of that, but there's specific percentages and measures
Okay.
that he has to follow. Anything outside of that goes
Right.
to the zoning board.
Yeah, I was wrong. It looks like the building inspector can do deviations, encroachments, or waivers, whatever they are. So,
So I think it's important to note, at least this is something that's been kind of stuck in my mind from the beginning of all this, and that's that sometimes terminology just becomes the way it just kind of happens instead of how it should happen. And what I mean to say is, the discussions here have been all about the form-based code, and I'm for the form-based code or I'm against the form-based code, and the signs around town is stop the form-based code, which to me, as someone who is an urban planner and a zoning specialist professionally, is hilarious, because truthfully, what people are opposed to, I think, if I'm reading the room right, not this room, but the larger room of Newcastle, is that they're opposed to an upzoning of our downtown. And so, but the reason I bring that up is, Bob, you mentioned, right, that there's Euclidean zoning, and we're trying to do something different here, and there are good reasons, and there are pros and cons for all types of zoning schemes. But one of the pros, supposedly, of a form-based code is that you are baking in those guardrails, those architectural requirements. I mean, Tom, you made reference to it. There's a ton of I mean, I just skip straight through that stuff because that's beyond me. That's not my world. But those guardrails are built in and pre-baked and sort of front-loaded with a purpose, so that there can be comfort to stakeholders and certainty to applicants, so that you say, you know what, I understand what you as a community want. You have asked for this, and now you've legislated it. So there's a little bit of danger, I think, in backloading an approval process, because then we're almost doubling down on approval processes. And so although I do, there's no answer at the end of this statement. I don't know what the answer is. I do like the idea, Tom, of combining boards and review panels, although I'm not sure what the answer is there. And also, does that require some sort of change statutorily for the town? It's a separate question. But a lot of the concern is about the density and the upzoning, and so I mean that's a separate discussion, right? That's not the process discussion, but for the process discussion, we do need to think, what is this isn't just an implementation of a form-based code, it's an upzoning and a form-based code. Do we like that? Just because it's called a form-based code, we can strip some of those
Right.
things out of it, and then it's really just it's a rezoning, ultimately, is what it is, with some of these in place. That there is no strict form-based code or Euclidean zoning anyway, because Euclidean zoning has design guidelines, and form-based codes have use guidelines, right? You can't we're not going to put an oil derrick downtown just because it's a form-based code that fits within the form. I don't have to say anymore, you understand. So anyway, all that to be said, like, we need to think about what it is specifically that's important to us, and what is the point of what we're doing, and how should we get at it?
Well, that's a big question with respect to the nature of the code itself, and I think accurately stated, the way the draft is written right now, and the DGIS actually promotes, is actually an upzone. Greater development, greater density, right? I mean, it's right there, and that's what people are concerned about.
Yep.
And I think that's a policy question. I'm not sure the extent to which the planning board needs to get involved in that, but we can, if we want to have a conversation about it. I have no problem having a conversation about it. But I think we're talking about that now. We're talking about the review process of whatever it is, right? And the review process of whatever it is, I think, just to restate it, and then I'll be quiet about it, needs to be done in front of the public, because there is really tremendous, the way I see it, there's an awful lot of discretionary power that the town has with respect to development applications. And because there's so much discretion in fundamental things, right? Fundamental things in an application that the town can grant, the public really, by reviewing the form-based code, really doesn't have a really accurate representation of what's going to happen, because through the process that can change. And that's why I think it's important to have it in a public venue, and so that those things are known.
I suspect, Elda, I think you really articulated it well for me, so even I could understand it. So that was terrific. And I tell you, I guess the concern is because it is upzoning. I think my concern is, along with the public aspect, is we need to be very careful to bake in too much up front. And again, given the way this dynamic economy goes and all different kinds of conditions and things that we can't really anticipate 10 years down the road, 15 years, 2 years down the road, I fear that baking in too much and making it automatic on certain, for example, the transect areas. I think baking that in and not understanding fully what the impacts could be construed to be, right or wrong, by neighboring neighbors is important. I'm not quite sure everyone is sold on the notion that upzoning to whatever stories you want to say. I'm not going to, I'll use 17 stories, okay, so that becomes unrealistic, so we don't get criticized. But if you bake in something that says you're good for, 17 stories, what does that mean? And it will be different with each one of these parcels. Now, there is certainty, just like there's certainty with anyone else, where you apply as a matter of right. But we all know the application as of right is always subject to all kinds of conditions. I mean, we had Dick and Tom were probably there. We had a very, very, very sharp land use attorney who one night just started with his constitutional speech right at the beginning, and just very annoying, and just went through the whole thing and said, this is as a matter of right, and blah, 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 all this kind of stuff. I said, terrific. I folded up the papers and just called the next case. And he said, what are you doing? I said, apparently you don't have to be here. You just said it's a matter of right. So I'm moving on to the next item. And of course he was furious and said, well, that's not what I meant. I said, I know that's not what you meant. Every single thing has got some sort of loading in there. So this whole thing as a matter of right, which is also baked in here, I think can be misconstrued by developers, the public, and everyone else. So it's very difficult language, very tough. I mean, you can't do anything in this town without a building certificate, CO, and all this kind of stuff. So everything has got some sort of guidance on it. And I think the issue is to what degree, at what level of upzoning are we comfortable to bake it all in at this point? And I think for me, that comfort level is in some cases lower than is proposed in alternative 3.
And I want to make one more statement here, or just make a point that one, we're making an assumption that if we bake all this up front, what is the public's opinion now remains constant. So talking about the comfort of the upzone, maybe 5 years from now, the appetite for it is very different. And that's one part of it. And then the second is market circumstances and economics can change in a way that you have to have some way to work it in. And I think that leaving some room for review of that, or making it a more breathing document is how I would see it. I completely agree with you. It's really talking about upzoning, and it's really not, so all this other sort of hoopla around it just seems ridiculous. And to think that it's going to stay the same for 20 years from now is also crazy. And so it's really about how do we create the right amount of base, build out the right processes and the right code so that you allow yourself to move up or move down based on market and circumstances. And front loading and back loading is it's very interesting what you said. I would say that if there is some sort of review process where it changes over time, or whether we add certain things to it or take certain things out of review process, that could be one way to go about it. But I was a little curious to see, or to understand from Sabrina, what you think is the one thing that you're really if you're looking at process today, where are your speed bumps and how you see it. You know, it was interesting, like, because you're looking at all the boards and you're sort of part of the whole process. So where do you see the most need for change? And how much of that is within, within what we talk about here?
Well, I think overall, and I'm going to speak generally, I think that the volunteer boards have difficulty staying within their purview of the current code. Point an example that, a lot of times the planning board discusses color or, architectural detailing, which is clearly just the purview of the ARB. A lot of times the ARB also has trouble staying within their purview. So it's kind of a situation across all boards. I do think that there is the length of an application before the planning board, if it is a larger application, and when I say larger, it's usually more than a lot line. It takes a long time. 91 Bedford was a code compliant development. It met the codes. It took 3 years. I think that was too long for that project, particularly given that they spent a very long time lining themselves up with the code. It's not to say that there weren't valuable and relevant points that were raised within those 3 years, but I thought it was a very long time for a process. And, as the planning director, I have many applicants come in to see me, and they sit down with me how long this is going to take if I have to go to the planning board. And I can't answer that question for them. I advise them to hire a good consultant, to be very responsive to the requests of the board, and to most importantly understand where their project measures up with the codes. Okay. And so that is why in the form-based code, there's a lot of detail in there. It's the most detail we've ever had in a code, particularly architecture, because believe it or not, the ARB doesn't feel that they need to decide color. And when the Bank of America building painted their building, it was a huge in the community, the color of that building. And that did not receive any board approval for color.
So if I can, just on Bedford Road, that did take a long time, but to be fair, I do remember there was a lot of back and forth on, where do the land bank parking spaces go? I remember going back and forth on that many times. And I got to a level of frustration. Is it really that important, right? But at the same time, the applicant was going through some real, I thought, challenging technical matters with respect to drainage. And that's what I remember. And I remember, and Bob Zioli was right on target, making sure that was done right. And it took a while to get that right.
Right.
And
But
that was part, I'm sorry, let me just finish. That was part of a technical review. So the technical reviews, which are absolutely necessary to get right, are part of the process that makes these things take long as well, not just the planning board.
correct. And so the one thing that I would say, the technical review, Bob Cioli and his team spend a lot of time, all of their time, doing technical reviews. Every building permit that comes in the door goes across Bob's desk because of the technical review, if it involves site improvements. So that technical review, whether it's during a planning board process or a building permit process, is done. I mean, that's really what the professional staff are doing, is reviewing every application that walks in the door and how it measures up with the town's codes from a technical review.
It's not, no, we understand that. And those are those in this town, in this county, in this state. There are some very complicated technical laws and review processes in that part of the process that the applicant needs to go through, and sign-offs and SWIPs and this and that and the other thing. And we sit there, and the applicant comes before us with the next stage in the review process, or the next application in the process. And very often, the list of things that need to be done are a 3 or 4 page memo that Bob Cioli is telling them that they have to get right. And it takes them a while to do all that stuff. And thank goodness that Bob is there. So I think it's unfair to say that, to point the finger at the planning board and say, gee, it's because you guys are just take too long to do these things. I think that it's a technical review process, which also really drives some of these longer applications. That's my opinion.
And I'm not going to disagree with you, Tom. And I'm not saying that it is, the planning board's taking too long. That's not my intention here. I was asked my opinion, and that technical review, whether it occurs before your board or it occurs process occurs, depending on how long they spend with your board during that technical review, will change the length of time they are going through the building permit review. So
I understand that.
And I'm not causing any, I'm not pointing fingers is what
No, I know you're not. All I'm trying to say is that we, in the conversation we're having now about the form-based code review, we're not talking about technical. We're not. If the technical review is driving a 3-month or 3-year process, I mean, that's going to be what it is, independent of what the planning board does.
Correct.
So we ought to be focused. We ought to be focused on what a review board on the planning matters, right? What we can do, and do it efficiently, and not worry about the fact that it took Bedford Road 3 years to go through their process, because that wasn't really necessarily all on us. I don't know. I think that I lost my thought. I'll come back to it. Unfortunately, I'll come back to it, I'm sure.
No,
perhaps we can. I'm sorry. Go ahead, please.
No, I was going to say, I didn't mean to, I totally understand that the back and forth is independent. I just wanted to understand if there's a way for us to, and maybe it cannot be independent and it cannot be compartmentalized, where it says, this is the length of time it sits with us. And if you meet all the requirements, you would get through it. And if you don't, then it's not on, then the applicant is the applicant. I mean, I remember this process at Irvington, where there was this cafe owner. The train station had to be converted to a cafe, and that owner came back and again and again. I mean, it took planning board and environmental board to sketch out things for him, because he just wouldn't get what he was being asked to do, and it would just keep coming back. And so I get that it's not on the boards if they're not meeting the technical review and things like that. I totally understand that, but I was just trying to see if time boxing it is something that we would consider and as being helpful. It doesn't mean that we have to compromise on anything, but saying it will sit within. If you meet all the requirements that are needed, it would sit in this, within the planning board's preview for X amount of time, and an ARB for a certain amount of time. I'm just throwing this idea out here, just listening to this. Yeah.
We might be able to look at more things that we can condition so that we can be finished. But to Tom's point, they're still going to have to finish these things before things get finalized and signed off. There's no secret here. The process has become much more complicated because of all the new rules and regulations. It's nothing like it was 20 years ago. It's much more complicated. And to Tom's point, I mean, some of these things you look at and you say, wow, they're things that really we have no jurisdiction over at all, but they've just got to get done as part of the checklist before we can sign off on it, because we have that final responsibility to make sure that they've complied with, east of Hudson and the SWIPs and the DEC and the DEP rules and DOT rules and setbacks and all this kind of thing. So maybe that's something we can look at in terms of streamlining, that they can be done with us. Because when they come to us, also remember, I think our requirement is what, 20 copies of everything, and it gets to be expensive and burdensome. It gets to be heavy just to haul it out of the police station going home some nights. So maybe that could help in terms of the process with expense and timing, that we can look a little bit more carefully and say, look, as long as you do these things and the technical people are okay with it, we're going to be okay with it. We've taken care of what we think are the issues that the planning board should be concerned with, or the zoning board, or whatever board is looking at it. And I think Bob has been doing a very good job that way. I always talk to him in between and say, are you comfortable conditioning these? And he'll tell me if there's something he's uncomfortable with or he wants some help on. But normally he works with the applicants and he's willing to condition it. I think one of the biggest stumbling blocks is frankly the applicants. And I think we're doing a better job because I think staff has really stepped up and said, look, we'll help you. We'll do remedial work for you. Bring it in, bring your crayons, we'll bring our stuff and really kind of do it for them.
Yes.
I mean, some of them are very unsophisticated. And then to your point, Kanan, no matter how many times you tell them, I mean, I'm talking about the consultants, you stare at them and say, you still didn't put the stuff on the plat that you're supposed to. I mean, it's been in the memos 4 times. What are you doing?
Right.
So,
can I get back, Kanan? I'm sorry, Eldad, where this started a couple of months ago, which is what do we really care about in the review process, and we really ought to try to identify that, to be specific about that. In the kinds of projects that one would anticipate in the hamlet, these are going to be relatively dense, tight developments, right? They're going to be urban developments. And I think it's, if you look at the list of, at least in the list of the discretionary items that would be up for discussion and debate with any developer, all of these things, you can't really pull the string, right? Without pulling on one thing, without pulling on another at the same time. And so I think it's difficult for me anyway to think about a way in which we would say, well, we care about 4, 5, and 6, but we don't care about 1, 2, 3, and 7, 8, 9, 10, because they're interrelated, and you can't touch one without affecting another. And so to that extent, it seems to me that if also somebody's got to worry about 7, 8, 9, 10. And if that's another review board, then that just blows up the process again.
No,
So-
but aren't we saying that 7, 8, 9 would be baked within the code so that we don't have to worry about it, right?
But I'm suggesting it's not baked within the code, because you can come in and say, well, I want additional open space, or I want to put this use on the property that's not allowed by code. Or you can say, if you just look at these things, I want to put my parking garage on the build-to line. Those are things that are maybe in the 7, 8, 9 in one person's mind, but those are things that I think are substantive to the success of the hamlet. So there are a lot of things that are not baked in, I guess is what I'm saying. It's sort of like,
can we conclude though on the process so we can move forward and say that in general, we are concerned with the way the code is currently proposed, that we think that a more public process should be involved. Something that's more streamlined perhaps than what we have now. And I think what would be really good is, to Eldad's and Kanan's suggestion, is that we actually offer some guidance to the town board and say, not that we just implement what we have now and replicate it, but we recognize that we can make some improvements. Here are the points that we think, here are the guardrails, the public guardrails of review boards we think would be useful. And then we can think about that and get some thoughts on it, and then we can move on to another issue, because I think we've kind of beaten process to kind of bludgeoned it here. Does that sound fair?
That process that you just outlined might be helpful to the development department also, in that they may have fewer meetings that they require with the applicant. If we get the public's ideas and our ideas into the mix, at least for certain projects.
Yep.
I'm less concerned about the buildings that are going to go up the hill, where they're going to be based on rock at some point, than I am, to the west of Greeley, where it's a converted swamp, and there's going to be more environmental and construction issues there, which warrant more concern. And I don't really feel that comfortable in giving any developer at right risk, at right type of approach for the stuff that's across to the west.
Well, they already have as of right. Well, if you're talking about the town-owned land, I think that's off the table with respect to as of right
Is it?
development.
Yes, it is.
Well, no, just
Yeah.
in
All right,
just in the sense of
I stand corrected.
this particular. No, wait a minute. Let me make sure I am communicating what I'm thinking here, which may it be at fault, but any property in town has as of right development associated with it. Under current zoning, you have as of right development. You can build what you want within. It doesn't matter whether you're building on
Right.
rock or whether you're building in groundwater. You put piles in. You still have as of right to build. It may be more difficult to build. As a consequence, you may not build, but there's no distinction between form-based code and the Euclidean code with respect to as of right development per se, I don't think.
Okay.
Are we talking about the extent of the form of the area that the form-based code will cover, Dick, or are we talking about the actual? I mean, what you're saying is some parts of what is now included in the form-based code you're not comfortable with.
Well, no, I'm not really uncomfortable with the things that are hypothetically possible.
But the extent
There's
of that.
some small things where the lines are drawn on somebody's driveway, and then there's another one where it's it looks like it's 10 feet away from the back of the house, and silly things like that can be fixed. So it's fine, but I think it gets to other issues which haven't really been discussed yet, as to if the taller of the buildings, particularly in the heart of downtown, the less sunlight we have, on the roads. It's, we have 2-lane roads going through our heart of our, commercial district. And so if you have a 5-story building on a corner, it's going to cut down sunlight. It doesn't look good. It makes it harder to look good. That's something that I would want the ARB to really take a look at, as to how it impacts the streetscape.
So
But-
Kanan, I'm sorry,
I
Bob.
changed the topic.
I'm sorry. Okay. So Kanan, you were asking the question, I think you're asking the question, are we talking about the code, the detail of the code, or where the boundary lines are drawn?
Yes, that's fine.
Yeah, so maybe that's on our agenda tonight. You want to get at that one? Bob, I think that's yours.
What do you mean, the study area?
Yes.
Yeah, the areas that are within the form-based code zone and are, maybe should be or shouldn't be. Like the town-owned land.
I thought that's really been decided by the town board, hasn't it? I mean, I didn't know that was really open for discussion.
Why
The
not?
actual,
It's not open for discussion, the actual area. I think that is a town board decision. But what I'm hearing right now is one of you had said that you're all in favor of letting development occur, up the hill, but you want, as a board, to be part of any discussion regarding town-owned land. If that's what I garnered from the statements that were made. And so
Well,
that
was my statement, not statements, but
Well,
my statement.
That
Yes.
was your statement, Dick. And so that's not discussing the area of the form-based code. It's talking about the process for a particular aspect area or a particular area of the form-based code.
Well, let me ask you a question. This is a technical question. The form-based code, in the form-based code, it defines the boundaries of the form-based code, doesn't it?
Correct.
And we are here to discuss the form-based code. The
Correct.
boundaries cannot be separated from the form-based code because it's the boundaries of the form-based code which drive the design, right? So
Correct.
we can't just say, well, the town, we can't say if we want to, the town board has already decided that. Then you can say the town board has already decided on everything in the form-based code.
But I think, Tom, the distinction is, we can talk about whatever we want, but I think the distinction is we can't, we shouldn't talk about expanding the area because of the environmental review. But I mean, I think we can talk about shrinking, or like Sabrina says, making distinctions in the code between public land and private land. So I just think from an environmental like scope perspective, if we wanted to say let's upzone all the way up King instead of stopping, then I think we can talk about it, but that's not going anywhere. But if we want to say, you know, we don't like something and we want to pull back, I think we have, and that makes more sense, right? Is that fair to
And
say?
you've said that in your DGIS comments.
But-
You said that the town land should not be part of the form-based of
What we said was that not that the town land should not be part of the form-based code. I don't think we said that. Maybe we did, but the intent was that they ought to pick alternative C, or that not that they should pick alternative C, but that all alternatives should be considered. And that alternative C was the alternative where there was no development on the town-based land. And the implication there is that, well, if there's not going to be any development there, then, you know, what's the point of having form-based code restrictions on land which would not be developed anyway? And the reason I think that this is important is that once you zone a piece of land, especially a big piece of land like that, and it's probably, I'm guessing, but I think it's not a wild guess to say that's the most valuable piece of land, probably. You know, Mount Kisco's doing one near their train station, but it's probably the most valuable piece of residential development land, you know, for miles around, because it's right by the train station, and it's in the middle of the Chapel Hamlet school district, et cetera, et cetera. That once you go ahead and zone it the way it's being zoned with all the form-based code restrictions and definitions and the assumption in the EIS that it's going to be residential, you're setting yourself up for a conclusion that either this town board or future town boards may decide that that's what they need to do, it's almost becomes foreordained, right? And my suggestion is that is that the right thing to do on town-owned land? Is there another idea? Is there another use, another kind of place to make right near a train station, right in the middle of the hamlet, that is more than, that delivers more than just more housing? And this is one of the things that I tried to bring up in the committee, that, you know, wait a minute, let's not be so quick to assume that, advertise by our zoning that developers, come on, residential developers, were ready for you. And I remember conversations on previous boards of, we are open for business. I mean, I remember somebody actually saying that, a previous supervisor saying, we want to let them know we're open for business and we need to attract developers. And whether that was what spurred this particular conclusion in the form-based code or not, I don't know, but it seems to me that it is asking for maybe something that the town, and I think that when LDAD talks about upzoning, that's what they're looking at. That's what the people are looking at. They're looking at that piece of property. That's 1,000 units. That is upzoning in 4 or 5 story buildings. I think that's where the concern is. And I think it's premature for the town to make that decision when it doesn't really have to. I thought that there are 2 things that I thought that they were looking to do. One was to generate a better, more walkable, livable, more vibrant hamlet. The other was to help the existing property owners, right? Give them an opportunity to make their properties more developable by using the form-based code and the expedited reviews, extra floors, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that that's a really good idea. I'm a little nervous about preordaining, in effect, big residential development on town-owned land.
So then my recommendation would be for this board then to offer a recommendation in relation to the form-based code of changing the boundary to reduce the area currently under the form-based code to exclude the town-owned land. That is a comment on the actual legislation, which defines a specific area.
And that's not to say that the town can't or shouldn't develop that land.
No, it's your opinion.
Well, wait, no, no, I know it's my opinion.
No. What I mean is,
it's not.
a recommendation.
It's not. Therefore, legislating that they cannot
Correct.
develop that land. They can develop it whenever and importantly, however is appropriate. And that to me is a much larger environmental community review, design review process.
Yeah, all the factors are greater on that piece of property.
So maybe, because I personally don't support excluding the town-owned land from the rezoning for a number of reasons, including, I mean, it puts the town at a disadvantage when, there may be competition for land, for to develop, and it's a great property, but maybe I definitely understand. I mean, I think your point that there's, if anywhere there's a place for public review and public input, then it might be the town-owned land. And so maybe, I think Sabrina mentioned it earlier, that maybe we want to think about a different process for public land versus private land, a different review process.
I agree with that, Eldad. And my thought on this was that it is premature. I absolutely, right from the committee, Tom and I were both against committing putting the town property in here. And one of the issues there is, I think so much more can be delivered to the town itself than just this housing proposal. So I think that's critically important. And I think before the town changes the zoning here and basically invites developers on this, first of all, I think strategically it's the wrong thing and wrong time to do it. You hold that out. You hold that off on that, because if you have a developer coming in, then at that point, perhaps at that point, you exchange for something else that's going to help on a private-public development aspect in exchange. So just to give it away like that and make it available, I think is wrong. But more importantly, I don't think this is one of the issues here is to try to promote the civic atmosphere, the civic activities. And I think to commit any of the public property without doing a Hamlet civic public property master plan in terms of what could be and should be done down there is just premature and just wrong strategically. I think at this point, again, going back to what the master plan was calling for and what I thought this entire process was about, which Tom just echoed in terms of the two things that we were really trying to go for. There's still, again, if we build out everything as recommended by alternative B or C, I forget which one, which includes the town land, is that really going to give the spark back to this hamlet? And what we've heard from the consultants, the economic consultants, was residential alone is not it. So what is it that we're going to have that's going to attract people? By the way, the document talks about what they call outsourcing of monies. I mean, the town the money goes out of the town, it doesn't go into the hamlet. So our residents are spending it elsewhere. What is it to get people in here? And again, I personally believe, and I thought this for a long time, that it's going to be some sort of public attraction in the town, in the civic area, that is going to drive this development and combined with housing, increased housing. That's going to do the trick and bring life and vitality and economic vitality back to the hamlet. You build this thing all out as proposed, and I don't see any other reason why someone's going to go into the hamlet. And the economic consultants have told us it will not work. It will not. It'll be insufficient. What's there that's going to be there? And I think to commit public property at this point, we don't understand or know what that public-private initiative might be is really terrible.
I had heard some of the town board discussions on this, and it seemed like they were talking about a similar paring down. Is that right? I mean, I've heard very few of these discussions, but there was some conversation of taking some of this public land and sort of pushing the decision making of what goes on there to a later date. Is that right?
Yeah. Excuse me, Kanan, I didn't mean to interrupt. The problem I have with putting especially this kind of zoning on the town-owned land is that it is very, very specific about build-to lines, for example, and about the form of the mast that gets put there. And it seems to me that that is very restrictive to any bigger idea of the kind of uses that could go there. And we don't know what they are. And that's one of the things that Bob and I pushed and pushed and pushed early on to let's work on identifying what those might be. And we never got there. And it's a difficult question to answer because there's only so much you can know about the future. But it seems to me, since there's only so much you can know about the future, it really is a mistake to put such rigid development boundaries and rules and regulations on a piece of property that you have no idea. I think you should admit, or you should be looking for a bigger idea for, rather than just developer residential development. So I believe that it should be pulled out of the form-based code, because even if you leave it, let's say you leave it in, and let's say that the town board, for whatever reason, decides that, first of all, I think to sell town-owned land, you got to go through some kind of a state process, and that takes a while. I think you have to do a referendum, unless I'm mistaken. Public referendum in town. I believe that's true. I could be wrong. And to go through that kind of a process, is that right, Nick? You're muted, Nick.
You're muted,
Yeah,
Nick.
sorry, thank you. I'll just make sure everyone was listening to me. It's a permissive referendum for the sale of town property, unless the board on its own makes it mandatory, which they have the authority to do so. And as indicated, they likely would. They would.
Okay, yeah, they would. I mean, okay, so they're going to go through a referendum, and the referendum that they go through, if it ends up being a referendum on the kind of upzoning that apparently is suggested by the form-based code, I think that's going to be a heavy lift. And I think it and I'm not
the
sure.
referendum is not on the upzoning. The referendum is on the sale of town property.
Right.
No, but I understand. But they
Okay.
would have to demonstrate what they're going to use the property for, I would think, right? And who they're going to sell it to, maybe who they're going to sell it to,
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
I guess for what price and under what conditions, and all of those things are the kinds of things that drive development. So they're going to have to go through that kind of process anyway. And I'm just guessing that in that process, there are going to be revisions. There are going to be site plan alternatives and site plans that actually don't meet the restrictions of the form-based code in terms of build two lines and all that other stuff. So why put something in there that then you're going to have to come back and go to the zoning board of appeals or re-legislate anyway? It just doesn't make sense to me. And I'm a little bit concerned that because it's in there is going to continue to be community pushback on getting the form-based code in place for the development properties that actually really need it, right? The local landowners in town that would really benefit. I mean, we know a couple of people who are sitting there just waiting on important pieces of property downtown, who are just waiting to be able to move forward on their property. And it just seems to me that it muddies the water and makes things more difficult. Muddies the water now and makes things more difficult downtown. I'm sorry, in the future.
And this is, I guess, a one particular point of the way it's currently drawn, but it seems also to me that the way this is drawn with the setback lines and the curves, et cetera, that this tends to create a little enclave that really is separate and apart from the rest of the downtown. So you have this little park proposed around this circle, and again, it's almost like this wall around the rest of the town, just the way it's configured. I mean, that could obviously be changed, but I know it looks kind of neat because it's got curves and the buildings will be curved, but look at that. You just have this little passageway from Woodburn out to the town, and everything else is secluded in this separate area. Again, I don't think it's fostering the kind of integration with the hamlet. And again, I think much more can be delivered with more creative uses, public uses. So I agree. I recommend that this area not be included in the form-based code.
I have another small one. As far as I can tell, the Greeley house is up for redevelopment because it's in the the new code zone. And
It's a landmark, isn't it?
It's a
it's a landmark, right? But it's not excluded from development. So
It's
if the people, it's
It's-
not public property,
It's owned, I believe it's owned by the Historic Society.
right? And what if they decide they want to, oh geez, look, we can make a lot of money. We'll burn the house down or whatever.
The assumption under the DGIS was that building would remain as the Historic Society, so that whoever was to put a development on there would probably have to do a supplemental.
All right. Well, I wish that, there was, a way to designate that this is.
That would be a deed restriction, and I would actually have to look at that to see if there is a deed restriction that prevents that building from being used otherwise.
Yeah. All right. Could you do that?
I will, yes.
Because otherwise it's open for, something happening there. That's not really helpful to the history of our town. Of course,
think-
these days there are people running around saying we should wreck everything that's old and get rid of it.
Including us.
Yeah.
Do we want to talk about required retail?
What?
Required retail?
It's 8:25. Do you guys have a time that you want to stop this discussion and set another date?
We'll let you know.
I actually,
Nice try.
I will need to drop off at 8:30 unexpectedly. That was not the plan, but I apologize. So in 5 minutes, I do need to drop off. That does not mean that you shouldn't continue without me long into the night. I encourage you.
Well, you're so thoughtful, Eldad.
Well, it seems to me that we haven't tackled parking, which is a big issue. The required retail, I don't know how big that is. I don't know how much you guys want to talk about architecture. I can't talk about it. It's,
Well, can we actually, in the 5 minutes that I have left, can we actually try to resolve at least a path forward for the two issues we have discussed, which is, process,
right?
And
Town property.
are we on board that we should try to come up with a better process that we think might be approved? Just sort of like a skeleton of a better process. Is that the right move forward? And should we just do that sort of offline on emails and then come back to it?
Yeah, I think we have to come back to it, but I like the idea. But one suggestion that I still like is I think the ARB should be involved in at least the back end of the project before it gets built.
So,
And if
yes.
it's only a one meeting thing, then it's not a real burden.
So, Eldad, yes, I think the answer is yes. We ought to offline come up with something that at least has some promise of basic agreement among us to sort of finalize in our next meeting.
Great.
And somebody needs to I think somebody should take the role of just putting something down on paper for us to respond to.
Hey, Connor, you're muted.
I'll try it on that issue. And then we have the town land. What was that? Someone's volunteering for work?
I was going to say, can I suggest that we put it on a Google document? I'm very happy to start it. I think everyone would love it. It'll just be easier for everyone to write it.
I would second that.
I'm happy.
Does it come with a tutorial?
Bob, you will be able to do it.
Really?
Bob Cruz.
That's, by the way, that's the bar that we use for the test.
I've been taking a lot of notes, so if you want, I'm happy to just jot down what we've been talking about, and then hand it over to everyone. The good part is all of us can get in simultaneously and actually make changes, and it'll all be tracked. So that'll be
super.
Yeah.
Great.
Okay.
I wouldn't want to make changes, just improvements.
So I'll tell you what, on the subject of the other subject, on the district boundaries, right?
Mhm.
Town land, however we want to call it, I'm happy to take a shot at that. And if I can get up to speed on Google Docs, I'll try it on that for everybody to share, and we go from there.
Yes, or I can share the document and then you can start writing within that. So.
Put it all
It's a
on.
good way to go about it.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
So you have a couple days off, Tom.
Yeah, before Eldad runs, Mega might be good. I mean, Sabrina's been sick. Eldad's leaving. I have no problem with setting up something maybe for next week and continuing this discussion because we do have some other
Okay.
big projects.
I'm good with that too.
If that seems okay. So, do we have a date that we can
Next
look at?
Tuesday is the 14th.
Is that okay for folks?
Yep. Good for me.
Sure.
Yeah, another Thursday.
It works for me too.
I think it would be helpful, and I would like to try, if I may suggest, because again, I think it was recognized tonight that the more meetings you have, the more work my office has. That we keep these meetings, if possible, to 2 hours. I think it helps people schedule other things that they need to do. Thursday is not a meeting night in my office, but every other night of the week is a meeting night in my office. So if I could ask that, if possible, to limit the discussion from 6:30 to 8:30.
Sure.
Okay.
Okay.
We get it done. We have to
That
get it
actually
done.
will give us the incentive to perhaps be a little bit more economic with our discussion too.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Very good.
Okay.
Okay. So I guess we need to, is there a motion to close this evening's special meeting?
Motion.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay, so we'll see everyone next Thursday. Thanks so
Hey, good
much.
night, everybody.
Okay.
Good
Good
night.
Night.
Good night.
Pam,
Yeah,
do I need to send an email to Carrie and set that meeting for next week, or is that
I
something?
just texted her. The thing is, there's also a fire department meeting that we're doing, and I think there's something, the inauguration.
Okay.
Whoops.
So I'm not sure, but I texted her to let her know. See, she'll figure out how we can do 3 or different
Okay.
meetings and things like that.
Well, also, Pam, so I have an account under Lyle.
Oh, she's got a couple of accounts. So
Okay.
it's
Okay, so yeah, just let me know if we need